Welcome to Plugin Development in Shopware 6. Today we would like to give you a brief overview why the plugin development in Shopware 6 is so awesome and so versatile, and give you a deeper look of how Shopware 6 really works. But first let's start with a little introduction. My name is Sebastian.
And I'm Stephan from Shopware.
Okay, as I mentioned, the goal of this talk is to get you started and show you why the plugin development is so awesome. And we start with a little sorry, our registration is closed at the moment plugin that we will do together in under 5 minutes, just to get you from 0 to hero. And before you even start to worry about folder structure and what to create and what not, we actually have a little helper for that, and that's the plugin create command. The plugin create command takes one necessary argument, which is the plugin name you desire. In our example, it's the 0 to hero name, and we pass the option to create a plugin config as well. So what that does is it creates a plugin config for us, which we will talk about in the next slide. Just to mention it, you can use the shorthand for this option, which is just -c instead of --create-config. So running this command gives you the full plugin folder structure and all necessary files for your plugin to work. And because we specified it, it also generated a plugin config automatically for us. And if we take a look at this plugin config, it's just a XML file, which basically lets you manage your plugin configuration based in cards. And this is inspired by the administration, because usually in the administration we also manage modules or larger modules in cards. It's easier to group your options by cards than having them all under each other. So we have one card in our auto-generated configuration. It has two titles, one in English, one in German. That's the default setting for this command, and one input field of the type bool. And the Boolean input field is sort of this Apple mobile switch that you know, and it just has the name active, and again two labels in English and in German to activate and deactivate our plugin in the administration besides the plugin manager. Now let's take a look how this looks in the administration itself. So without writing any JavaScript or HTML or Vue.js, the configuration gets rendered in the administration, and that's just awesome. And it's even sales channel configuration based. So you can enable your plugin for all sales channels or for one specific. That's just awesome without basically no work at all. And what I want to mention at this point is that you can find all the available input field types in our documentation at docs.shopware.com. So now that we can configure our plugin in the administration, let's actually use it and do what we want to do and close our registration at some point when we activate our plugin in the admin. So for that, we just extend the register index HTML of the storefront and check with an if statement inside the correct block that our plugin is activated, and then insert our custom header which is just sorry, our registration is closed at the moment, and a funny little image. Really important here is the else statement calling the parent block, because if you would not do that, the registration would never work, even if you don't enable the sorry, our registration is closed at the moment. And that's basically all. And you have successfully developed your first plugin, and this is what it would look like. You have your custom heading and the funny little image on your screen. Yeah, congratulations. So now that you already created your first plugin, let's learn a little bit about more what's around the plugin, our plugin system in Shopware 6, and what a plugin itself technically is. The plugin system facts that you need to know. So what are the goals of the plugin system? The goal of the plugin system is it to allow easy extensibility, give you a great developer experience, and keep the performance up at the same time, and of course the stability as well. So those are the key points that when we sat down and developed this, that we took a look at. So just a few little Examples of what the plugin system does for you. The change logs are maintained in a simple markdown layout. Basically, each heading marks a version, and then you just commit the changes in an unordered markdown list. The plugin system uses the same database migrations as the core. So this is really great because every time that you need to take a look at how they did that or that in Shopware 6, you can just look in the core and do the same in your plugin migration and it will work. So the plugin configuration that you met earlier in this talk is a really great feature of the plugin system, if not the greatest. You can do your simple configurations or even more advanced configurations without writing any JavaScript if you are a backend developer, for example, like me. The last thing I want to mention now is that we are enforcing Composer with our plugins by managing the versioning and the metadata via Composer. So now you learned a little bit about what we do around plugins. Of course, there's more, but those are like the main key features I want to point out right now. So what is a plugin? Technically, a plugin is a Symfony bundle plus our lifecycle functionality. And by lifecycle functionality, I mean things that you need to do, for example, on an install or when you uninstall your plugin. Like checking if your server is available that your plugin needs to talk to or whatnot. And on the technical side, a plugin needs to consist of a Composer JSON. As each PHP developer know, if you want to maintain the versioning via Composer, you need a Composer JSON. And the metadata for your plugin, such as labels and descriptions, is done in the extra tag of your Composer JSON. So besides that, you would also need your plugin base class, which is the entry point, the PHP entry point of your extension, where you would do certain things on install, uninstall, activate, or deactivate.
Now let's take a moment and talk about the technology stack that we have in place, and also the reason why we're using well-established standards in our software. So let's take a closer look here. We have a bunch of different technologies. To name a few, we have Symfony, we have Bootstrap, Vue.js, Angular, SCSS, and Twig, for example. And the list goes on and on and on. But what does that mean for you? Well, the experience you have with these standards or technologies can be transferred right to Shopware, so you can begin developing right away without needing any special knowledge, and also we keep the learning curve down this way.
Yeah, as Stephan just mentioned, we use the Symfony PHP framework on our server side, and we not only use it, but we enforce the standards that come with it, and that's what I really want to point out. Basically, I think the second slide of this talk was the plugin create command, and this is a standard Symfony feature we just extended in Shopware or brought with Shopware, so you can create a plugin easily. And with Shopware 6, there are 99 console commands ready to use for you. And if you want to see a full list of them, just run bin/console to see the full list. So without specifying a command, it gives you all the commands that are there. Of course, not every command comes from Shopware, but we put in quite a few, so to give you a better experience developing. Our whole API is based on standard Symfony controllers. Of course, here and there's a little bit magic going on, such as registering routes based on each entity, which we are going to talk about later. But under the hood, it's all standard Symfony and no extra thing we implemented. The event system we are using is driven by the Symfony event dispatcher, which is also a standard and common pattern to use this. So if you know the event dispatcher from another application, maybe you know how events in Shopware 6 work, which is great. And the by far best feature of it all is the dependency injection for me, which is just the killer feature. of Symfony, for me at least. So basically what this does is you have somewhere in the system a service got defined, and you can acquire this in your service controller or in your application at some point out of the container without caring about anything and just saying to Symfony, I need this. And Symfony takes care of the rest, which is just awesome, with just a little XML defining here and there. And even our core concept in Shopware 6, the card, little side note, what a lot of people don't know, Shopware 6 evolved around the card. So we wrote the card first and then evolved everything else around it. And even this core feature is extensible by using a standard Symfony technology, which is tagged services. A tagged service, you can imagine, so a service in an XML file, you define a service and an ID and maybe a class, so it is identifiable and usable for the dependency injection container. And tagging those services, you can imagine someone going through a grocery store and just putting group labels on certain items. And at some point in the application, you can say, hey, container, give me everything from group A. And you get a collection of those services back and can work with them. And this pattern we are using for our process chain in the card to extend that. So all you need to do is write a PHP service, register it in the dependency injection container, and tag it with a certain tag, and it will get used automatically by Shopware with a standard Symfony tool. So now let's talk a little bit more about data and how it flows through our application. What are we talking about when we are saying data or a data set, for example? Let's stick for the example. Let's stick with a product, for example. And a product in Shopware is an entity. And an entity in Shopware always evolves around an entity definition. A entity, so those are two files you will certainly need if you want to build your own entity. And we have a third one that's, let's call it semi-optional, because it is pretty common that when you do a search operation, you will get back more than just one entity, and then you would like to have a place where they are all collected and where you can provide a little more functionality, such as filtering down on certain fields like collection, give me only back the red entities or whatever. So let's take a look at what an entity is. I bet the most of you know entities already. An entity is just a PHP class with type-hinted properties and getters and setters for that. And the entity definition actually maps these properties to database fields and also takes care of translations and association managing. But we are not gonna talk about that in this talk because we have no time for that. So really, the entity definition mentions the entity and the entity collection, so we have all in one place. And that's why we take the entity definition over to the next slide. So in the entity definition, the entity and the collection is mentioned. And for each entity definition that you register, again, in our dependency injection container, an entity repository gets generated for you. And in the entity repository, all CRUD operations are available to you. For example, searching, creating, updating, or deleting entities is possible with those entity repositories. And the entity repositories are then used by our API. And for each entity repository, there are the corresponding API routes automatically generated for you. So what does this mean in context? You created 3 PHP files, the entity definition, the entity class itself, and a collection, and you got a repository out of it, and the API routes with literally no work.
All right, so we know how the data flow on the server side is working. Now let's take a look on how it typically works in the administration. The typical data flow is we are loading data from the server, and at some point the user made some changes and presses the blue save button at the top right. So first and foremost, what we do is we are loading an entity scheme from the API. This scheme contains all entities as well as their relationship and associations. based on these entity scheme or on the factory that we have in place here, we are automatically generating repositories, and these repositories are there to communicate with the server, as well as setting up all the necessary headers, like for example the authentication and stuff like that. So pretty much everything is there for you and you don't have to do anything. So let's keep to the example that Sebastian bring up, and we would like to search for products. So what happens now? We are sending a request to the server and getting back a so-called search result, which is pretty much a helper for our products or for our search result, which helps us to, for example, get the first and the last product or filter down the result even more. Inside this search result, we have multiple entities, and what we can do with them now is we are just giving them to a Vue.js component. And the cool thing about Vue.js is it takes care of everything else. It sets up a two-way data binding, which means that when the user made changes in the UI, these changes will automatically reflect into the entity. So let's assume the user made some changes here, changed a couple of fields and stuff like that, and the user presses the button. What happens now? We are saying the repository, hey, we would like to save this entity. The repository, on the other hand, invokes a so-called change set generator. This generator divs the user data with the loaded data from the server side and creates the smallest possible payload which we are sending to the server, and this greatly increases the responsiveness of the application. Okay, so let's sum up the data handling here. We have an entity scheme which is generated by the server-side entities, like Sebastian told you, just 3 files and that's it. We don't have to create models on the client side anymore. Using the scheme, we can also automatically create repositories and entities as well as their associations to each other. The change set generator, on the other hand, compares the provided data from the user with the loaded data and creates diff out of it. So we are just sending the changes which the user made to the server. That means super small payload and the application feels way faster this way. And standards are also important here. So the API returns an open API compatible format for us here. So we talked a little bit about the administration already and how the data flows through the administration. Let's be honest here, the shop owner spends the most of his time in the administration. So I would like to give you a closer look here and explore it a little bit with you. First and foremost, we have a module system in place. How can you imagine that? Well, the Shopware administration is more like a framework here. And the framework provides you with a way to call these mini applications and execute them within these frameworks. These small applications is what we call modules. And as you can see on the right hand side here, modules are created using a simple configuration object. These modules are pretty much self-contained applications. They come with their own snippets, which we are calling UI translations here, and also the administration, which is a really important part here, uses client-side rendering and client-side routing as well. So this means you can pretty much define the routes for your module here, and it's also possible to define child routes as well as adding routes to different modules. So you're not just sticking to your own module, you can extend other modules as well. And for us, a great user experience is also a key feature of the administration. So what does that mean? Well, your module can choose an icon from our handcrafted icon set, as well as specify a color from our color coding system. So when the user is navigating the administration, he always knows where or in which part the user is. So how is the routing and the component handling works here, and how we are making the bridge between our modules and Vue.js? Well, first and foremost, which is really important here, that everything what the user is looking at is a Vue.js component. And we are separating these components in 3 sections. We have a page file or a page component, we have views and normal components. So as you can see, a route is pointing to a certain page here, and this page just contains additional Vue.js components like input fields, media uploads, data grids, and so on. So a bunch of Vue.js components. Well, sometimes we are having the case that the module is getting really big, and we would like to separate that a little bit further. And when we are doing this, we are calling about, or we are talking about child routes. So what we can do is literally we can separate our application in even smaller parts here. To do that, we still have our page component in place, but we're adding a special component which is called router view here. What it does is pretty much it displays different components based on a route inside of another component. Like I said, in this case, the page component. And inside this router view, we are rendering the views. And now imagine it like that. You have a tab panel, for example, in your module, and each tab is a view component. And this is pretty much all the magic here. The rest works as described before. The content is just a bunch of smaller components here again. So now we know a little bit about components, and we heard a lot about it and already. So how is it working here? We created something which we call the Shopware third-party interface, which provides a wrapper around the Vue.js components. And this wrapper allows us to register new components as well as extend and override existing components. But not only that, the administration comes with something what we call component library. It is a library containing 230 predefined components ready to use for you. But not only that, the third-party interface allows you to access the entire application here. And this means that you can invoke every service or every factory from any component that you're writing, as well as any service that you're writing. And not only that, dependency injection is also a really important part here for us, and we baked a dependency injection system right into the administration, as well as hooked it up to Vue.js provide and inject pattern here. And if you take a look on the left-hand side, you see a template there. This template is using Twig on the client side, which allows us to provide you with the well-known block system here. It's the same thing. We are using standards again, so you just learn something once and can use it in the other parts of the application. Like here, we are talking about the administration, but it works the same way in the storefront. Alright, so you can see the administration is a little bit more than just a website. I would like to give you an overview how the structure of the application is working, or how it looks like. You can imagine the administration more like an onion, or an onion kind of pattern that we have here. We are wrapping layers around each other. The first layer that we have in place is something we call the core layer. It contains the data layer, workers, factories, and our dependency system. The next layer that we're putting on top of that is called the app layer. It contains our basic snippets, routes, our plugins for Vue.js, and our component library, as well as our icon set. And last but not least, there's yet another layer, and it's called the module layer. And it contains these small applications we talked before. And we have modules like the customer module, the product module, or the media manager here. So everything is pretty much layered around each other and builds on top of each other. So we talked a little bit about the administration, and you have an idea how it works. Another essential part of Shopware is the storefront, and I would like to give you a closer look here as well. I know you heard it many times before, but we are using well-defined standards here again. We have Symfony, Twig, and Bootstrap available to you here. We also have JavaScript plugins, which are, for example, there for the off-canvas, for filtering and stuff like that. These plugins are written in ECMAScript 6. If you're not feeling comfortable with ECMAScript 6 yet, or you don't want to adapt to new technology right now, jQuery is also available for you. The next thing, which is really important and which is really cool in my opinion, is the developer experience which we are providing here. We have something what we call hot module reloading. So what does it mean? When you're doing changes in your IDE, it automatically reflected these changes into the actual storefront, so you don't have to do anything here. Next up, we also have pre-processing using Webpack as well as SCSS. This means that you have all the new technologies to work with, and you don't have to worry about compatibility or stuff like that. And to give you a little head up here, or a good start here, I would like to create a theme review. So how you do that? You're using yet another Symfony console command, which is called theme::create. And the only thing what you're providing here is the name of the theme. In our case, it's Time to Shine. This generates you a new plugin which contains the new theme as well as the entire folder structure what you need to start right away. Next up, we are changing Css variables. The first one, the $primary, is the Bootstrap primary color. We are changing that to a nice blue. On top of Bootstrap, we have something called the Shopware skin. We are also changing the primary color here to the blue, what we gave to Bootstrap. And the last one is, I would like to have my buy button in a shiny purple, so I set this variable here as well. Next thing pretty much is we are compiling our theme using the theme::compile command, and voila, our theme is completely changed. The colors are changed and the store looks completely different. It's that easy as that.
Yeah, awesome. You learned quite a few new things until this point, and now it's a little bit about mindset, I would so to say. Basically, a colleague of mine told me this phrase, I don't know, a year ago or something. If you don't like it, change it. And what we mean by that, we sure hope that you don't have a lot of things in Shopware that you don't like, but maybe you are finding a few things missing, or you would have thought of differently. So with the knowledge you learned in this talk and today over the SCD, be that person who changes things, program plugins, and do it. Just do it. So to end this now from my part, I would just want to give you a few more examples what you can do with a plugin in Shopware 6. And as we mentioned right in the beginning, but I want to point out once more because I think this is really just a great feature, and we have a few plugins ourselves which really evolve around this whole concept, is to extend the cart. Maybe you want, or you can think of a way that a normal product handling in the cart is just not enough, and you want your own handling or want to enrich the handling of a product. Do it. It's there for you. Just write your own collector or processor, register it in the DIC, remember to tag it, and the right tag you will find in the documentation of Shopware, and you are done. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's not a really beginner-friendly or easy topic, but it's there for you. Go try it out. Have fun. And as well, you could implement your own payment method, really your own or your favorite one that you are, or that's lacking in Shopware right now. We have a great payment API in Shopware 6. Synchronous payments and asynchronous payments are ready to use. You just define pretty much your own payment handler, and your payment method is ready. And that's documented as well. One more simpler thing I can think of right now is to add a certain filter to a storefront listing. For example, you want to filter products that are low in stock, or I don't know, maybe for special offers or something. And there's just so much more you can do. I bet if you ask something in the Q&A session, which we will have later, if it is possible, I will certainly 99% of the time will say, yes, that's possible.
All right, so that's it. Thank you for your attention and your time. I hope you learned something to get you started with the plugin development in Shopware 6. If you want to, our Twitter handles are down below. give us a follow, and yeah, like Sebastian mentioned, we have a little Q&A session for you, as well as a Slack channel available, so you can have a chat with us or ask us any questions you want to. Yeah, thank you very much, and keep being awesome.